Okay, so we have the present tense of these deponent verbs, and the way that the future and the imperfect and the aorist are formed are going to be very similar to the way that they were formed with our other verbs, with the ones of the form like luo. They have their own endings, but the characteristic of what made a future verb, for example, was the addition of the sigma in between the stem and the ending. And that's going to be exactly the same with the future here. So if we take our present tense verb, we can just simply add a sigma in between the stem and the ending. So we'll end up with rusomai, and then we've got Urusei, and then Urusatai, Usomatha, Uruseste, and then we have Rusontai. Okay, so the future just has this sigma added, and you'll see its endings are identical. So just like we did with Luo, when we had the endings for the present tense, we just inserted a sigma in. So we had a new set of endings with the sigma, which indicate the future. So we have the same with these deponent verbs. So they act in that sense in the same way, just have their own endings, right? And with the perfect, if you remember when we were doing the imperfect and the aorist, then to indicate something has happened in the past, we added an epsilon in front of the verb, and that's going to happen again here. So to get the imperfect, we're going to insert, or not insert, we're going to add to the front of it an epsilon. So we've now got eru. So notice that the breathing has come off of the ru, because it's now no longer the first letter. And we've got here, just check I like that one. Yeah. Our ending now, our endings are changed in the same way that our endings changed for the imperfect under luo. So here we've got ruemain, okay, and then we've got a ru, to excuse my pronunciation, which may not be conventional, I'm sure. Erueto. We've got Eru Omitha. You'll notice that one looks similar to what you've got before, which is always handy. There's kind of like a standard sort of ending in the plurals. So we get Eruis there. So that's the same again. You can see the ending is similar. And then Eru on toe, which is slightly different, but still has that sort of standard part to it. So there is some similarity in terms of the endings, and you can usually kind of guess which ending goes with which if you're not entirely sure, because of the certain similarities, which hopefully you can sort of spot. But note, particularly in for the imperfect, although it has its own endings, it has the epsilon that's added to the front. So we now know that we're dealing with the past. Okay, and then the aorist, which has a combination of both of those things from the future and the imperfect. So it has its own endings, and you'll possibly remember from looking at the imperfect and the aorist with the luo verb that often the differences between the omicron and alpha. Use an alpha in the aorist tense in the endings, which you will see. So we are going to have our usual epsilon at the start, and then we're going to add in the sigma, which we do for the aorist. So we have the epsilon and the sigma, and then we have slightly varied endings. So arusamen as opposed to arusomen. Oh, sorry, as opposed to aruamen. Okay. So notice the alpha that pops up here, and always a bit of variation with the second person singular. You have to be careful of that because it's got an omega at the end. It's not a first person verb, okay? And then we've got arusato. That's going a bit funny, apologies. and then arusametha. So it's not ometha, we've got the almetha. Notice the alpha that appears there. And the same with this one. So we've got the alpha again instead of the omega. So that's a really bad epsilon that. And then erusanto. Now, I know it looks like a whole load of new words. There's quite a bit of similarity in them, though. And in many ways, just getting to learn some of the key characteristics of these verbs and their endings just takes a bit of practice and just seeing them. But you can hopefully see, and I'll just highlight a few things. So we have the alpha that appears in the aorist, okay, as opposed to the oh, well, in this case, in some of the cases, we can just put it there. Okay. So that's kind of a key thing. One of the other things that we note, of course, is that for the aorist, we have the epsilon at the start, which happens with the imperfect too. All right. So we note that. So we know that we're dealing with a past tense. So that's a table. And if we take deponent verbs, they have those similar endings. You get all the usual stuff that happens with the sigma. If you have a particular stem that ends with a certain consonant, so the contraction will take place in the normal way. So you just have to obviously pay attention to that in the future and in the aorist. So what we'll do is have a look at spotting some of those and trying to translate them. And I have got a set of questions. Now they all look fairly similar, and I've kind of stuck to the third person singular and plural just for now, because what I want you to do is to spot which of the tenses we're looking at. Is it the present, is it the future, imperfect, or aorist? Okay. So we need to obviously identify which deponent verb we're using. So I wonder if we can just pull those back through. Let's copy that and see if we can. Okay, so if we just look at the first group, maybe just see them how they work together. So the intention here is just to try to work out whether we are looking at present, future, imperfect, or aorist. Okay, so there are 4 different forms of the indicative mood here. So in terms of number 1, 2, 3, and 4, we have similar words either side. So ho Juanes, which is John, and John is doing something. So here we have a verb, pros eukete. So this comes from looking at our chart. We can see our pros eukomai, which is just over here, is the verb to pray. Okay, so this comes from pros eukomai. Right, and what we have is the ending etai. Okay, so when we look at that and we think, okay, so we have the main stem, and our main stem here is still the same as the stem here. So we must be dealing with the present tense. Okay, so John is praying to God. Okay, so proston theon is towards God, to God. Okay, so for number 1, I'll just put them up here. For number 1, we have John is praying to God. Right, when we come to number 2, looking at how this particular verb works. So we've got pros you, and then we've got xi now, sete rather than pros eukete. So we've had a contraction here. So when we've added a sigma in, which must have been included in this place, and it's turned it into the XC. So we must be dealing now with obviously proseuchomai, which is the verb to pray, but with a sigma added and no epsilon at the front means that we're dealing with a future tense. Okay, so this is a future. So therefore, for number 2, we have John will pray, okay, to God. So we're now looking at a future tense here. So John will pray to God. Right, so I think the key thing to highlight here, and I don't know which color we should be using, but we'll use a color in here. So I'll highlight that in blue, which indicates that we've got the contraction from chi plus the sigma, which goes to C. Okay, and you can look back at the table some while ago of those things that happen. Right, so number 3, got well, look now what's going on with this one. So just pick up some of the changes that take place to the verbs. And one of the things to note with proseuchomai is that it's got this preposition at the start of it, the pros. And so when we add an epsilon, we're adding an epsilon into the front here. Right, and in terms of the way that the epsilon contracts with the other epsilon that comes with it, it lengthens it, so it turns into the eta. So the epsilon is at the front of the verb stem, but because the verb is a compound verb, you'll remember, I hope, that that the epsilon kind of goes in between the preposition and the start of the kind of main verb, if you like, the main stem. So we have really the 2 little bits that take place in our verb is an epsilon added to make the eta, and the sigma added, which changes the chi. And so we end up with this verb, proseuxato, however we might say that. But the point is, it's an aorist. Okay, so that's an aorist verb. And therefore we'll translate number 3 because of the fact it's aorist is John prayed. Right, so undefined, John prayed to God. And finally, given that we should have the imperfect last, as that's the only one we haven't had, so there's no sigma added this time, so that's why we still end up with the chi as it is, but we do have the epsilon added, which obviously changes that. So proseuxato will give us an imperfect, and that's John was praying to God. So we want an imperfect, which is a sort of continuous action in the past. So we translate that in English is was praying. So John was praying to God is our imperfect for number 4. Right, maybe you'd like to have a little go at the next group, and just to see if you can work out which one goes with which. And I'll leave you for a few minutes on that, and I'll stop the recording.